This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball. Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. For the last 2 weeks, I was in England. I got to see my favorite soccer team, Crystal Palace, win the FA Cup, but I also played in 4 baseball games for the Oxford Kings. I first started playing with them when I studied there in 2016, and I've played with them in Italy every year since. This time I traveled out to Milton Keynes and Cambridge for 2 doubleheaders. I won both my starts, and we won 3 of the 4 games. British baseball is special. It's everything that's missing about rec baseball in the US. These players travel for hours to play on a field with a plastic fence rolled out and a chain link wall for a backstop that doesn't stop any foul balls. But they love it, and I do too. And Dale Jacobs' book, Makeshift Fields, captures that perfectly. He travels to Scotland, Ireland, England, and Wales to watch games along the way, and he comes to understand the dedication and enthusiasm for the sport in these places that you wouldn't usually expect it. We had a great chat. Enjoy. Welcome to the podcast, Dale. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. The book is fantastic, and we'll talk about this, but it's a subject very near and dear to me. So I'm very glad that you wrote it. I always like to start off by asking, where does this idea come from for you?
It's kind of a logical extension of 100 Miles of Baseball, which is the previous baseball book where my co-author and I went to 50 games within 100 miles of our house. And a little bit of that was major leagues, some minor leagues, but most of it was amateur. So I'm very interested in baseball that gets outside of the majors. And so I think that's where this comes from. Now, I originally thought I wanted to write more about sports, but I was going to write about basketball, and I heard there was basketball in Ireland, so I went home and I was Googling basketball Ireland, or at least I thought I was, and I mistyped and wrote baseball Ireland, which is funny, and clearly it was still on my mind, and I saw that there was baseball there, and that kind of led me to think, well, what about Scotland? What about England? What about Wales? And I went down this rabbit hole and discovered, yeah, there's lots of baseball going on. And so that was the start of it. It was just curiosity to begin with. I talked to Invisible and they were interested in this idea, and then the trip started to come together. But it wasn't until I was over there talking to players and coaches and scorekeepers and umpires that I started to see how passionate people were and what it meant to them. So then the book started to really come together in my mind, and I started to feel this intense responsibility for telling the story of baseball in these places.
I want to talk about this trip because it's a pretty intense trip, it sounds like. What were some of the logistical difficulties you had in trying to make this work here?
Well, one of the main things is, as you know, the games are only on the weekend, and they're basically on Sundays. So I'm used to amateur baseball in Windsor, for example. They play during the week. So if you were somewhere for a week, you could see a couple of games and 1 or 2 practices or training, as they call it there. But with games only once a week, it really posed some problems for scheduling. I had to make sure I was at different places on the weekends It also meant that I spent much more time at training sessions than I expected to, which honestly was a blessing in disguise because at training I could talk to people. They had time to sit down with me and record an interview. That wasn't always possible at games. And as the trip went on and then I came back and started writing, I realized that it's about the people and the places more than it is about game action. Um, there is, there are some passages about games, but it's so much about the people and the places instead of the games. So that was the hard part um, initially. Then I had to decide, okay, where am I going? Which club? I got connected with Baseball Ireland early on, and that helped. I knew I would be in Dublin. There's a cluster of clubs there. I also knew I needed to go out to Cork because that was a new place. Baseball Scotland was similarly, I got connected with them, and I had to sort of work out when to be where. And then England was the hard part because, as you know, it's so diverse, and there are leagues that are under the BBF and leagues that aren't under the British Baseball Federation, and I knew I could only go to one site, so that was a bit hard. I got connected with Gabriel Fiddler, who helped me to think through that. Ultimately, there I settled on Leicester because there's a men's team and a women's team, and that's what led me there. The other thing that happened is I realized that the British Summer Cup was on in Slough when I was there. So that became kind of an anchor event in the middle. I could go watch a big baseball tournament with teams from all over the UK for 3 days, and I could discern what to do on either side of that. But yeah, the logistics of this were so complicated.
Taking a step back here, before you left, did you have a story in mind you were trying to tell, or did you have, what was your research process like? What were you hoping to get out of this, and how did that actually compare to what the experience was like?
Didn't have a, I didn't have an idea before I went. Um, I had the parameters of the trip. I knew who I was going to spend time with. I didn't know what I would find in each of those places, but I knew I was doing this trip and I would write about that. As I go along, that seems to be my methodology. I'll figure out some kind of project. I do that with writing about comics too. I'm going to write about 1 year in comics, or this time it's one summer in British and Irish and Scottish baseball, but I didn't know what was going to come out of it. When I came back, I had hours and hours of tape, or what we would have called tape. Uh, I had all these interviews and I had a lot of field notes. And so I started to write. And in my writing process, I always have to figure out what the shape is, the organizational principle. It became apparent very quickly that this needed to be chronological, that the shape of the trip is the shape of the book. It makes sense in all kinds of ways. It could have gone, I could have done it thematically, etc. But the Baseball Ireland stuff actually sets up so much of what's in the rest of the book. And by the time I started writing, I realized that. So it becomes a bit of a travel log with the shape of the trip being the shape of the book.
What were your initial impressions of seeing a game for the first time?
So the first thing I saw was a training session at Mariners baseball, and they had to first set up the field. So dragging all the stuff from a container that's locked by the side of this public park, and I knew from that moment this is different in that way. That you have to really be committed, and that would get echoed throughout the trip. But it just seemed so provisional from the beginning of what I saw. But then once the training started, or once a game started, what happens between the lines is exactly the same. There's no difference. Skill levels vary as they do here, but the game on the field is the same. It's everything that surrounds it that's very different than what happens in North America.
I can remember my first time. The training grounds for Oxford and where they play their games, they're pretty far away from the city center where I lived at that time. And I remember we had to roll the fence out.
Yep.
It's like we didn't have fences, and
Yep.
so we had to. It was like that soft plastic fence. You kind of had to like roll it out and turn it into a fence.
Yep.
We had a backstop, which we were lucky. I mean, which is not always the case. It is grassroots. And when I saw the title of the book, Makeshift Fields, like, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. We played on a rugby pitch.
At Cork, they play on a GAA field, and you talk about rolling that orange plastic.
Yeah.
I saw them do that in Edinburgh. I mean, they play in an enormous public park. They have to put the backstop up every time and measure out where the field should be. And on that field, they don't even have a mound. So they have this wooden contraption that they bring out. And I swear somebody is going to really hurt themselves on that thing. But that's what they bring out. The fields that actually have a mound, even if they don't have anything else, that's a major victory to have a mound and maybe to have the cutouts for the bases. And if they have permanent anchors for the bases, that's that's pretty far advanced.
Yes.
They really are makeshift, and
Yeah.
that's the title for this book. The working title was always Chasing Baseball, and then as the press was putting together the marketing stuff, someone wrote the phrase Makeshift Fields. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what it is. That needs to be the title of the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've played pretty extensively in England.
Mhm.
I'm very curious how you thought the comparisons between the other countries were versus England.
I think the main difference is with Ireland, how much is put into kids' baseball and into developing the sport in a sustained way. That's not there in England. It's not there in Scotland either. That's adults playing, and in England and in Scotland, the people who are from there, almost all of them learn to play as adults. In Ireland now, you're starting to have a lot of kids. They may start as early as 5, like they do here. And they've made this really sustained effort to try to grow the game in a way that it won't go away. And it's not like people in England and Scotland and Wales don't understand that. It's just getting the volunteers. Because as you know, that's what's hard is the volunteer labor. They've been able to do that in Ireland. They've got enough people who are willing to coach and willing to put the hours in that way. But that too is precarious. In terms of skill levels, it's so dependent on who happens to be at each club. Every club's got some good players. It sort of depends if they've got enough mass of good players that tips them into being a good team or not. And then, as you probably know, anybody who has experience playing baseball, they're going to be asked to pitch at some time, whether they've ever pitched in their lives or not. So you get these mixes of people playing the game. That gets off of your initial question a bit, but in terms of talent levels, I don't think there's a big difference. It's the development of the game through kids playing that I see as the big difference, especially between Ireland and what happens in the UK.
I know over at Oxford, they are pushing more for the youth development program. I'm
Yeah,
bringing a bunch of equipment over for them to donate because one of those things you don't think about. It's like you can't just go to the store and pick up a new
no,
bat if
yeah,
you break one. Everything is a struggle there. And I think that also I can say in Oxford, a lot of the players who have been there, they're for 20 years or so now, they're not young anymore. And there is this real sense of what comes next. And that is a constant thing. Oxford's unique in the sense that university students come as I was, where I'm there for a couple of years and then I leave. And they've made it work. Over 25 years now, which is incredible. I found when I look at baseball in the UK and baseball here, especially at the youth level here, and this is something you probably are pretty familiar with too, people don't really play for fun here anymore. Like there's very little, we're going to go play baseball. And it's almost the complete opposite in the UK, where they are doing it because they love the game in a way that I find so refreshing, seeing where youth baseball is today.
Yeah, I agree completely. And again, to go back to Ireland, I remember talking to parents at one of the kids' practices. And I remember one of the mothers saying the atmosphere around baseball is so different. She also had kids involved in hurling, and there it was high pressure, like baseball often is here, or hockey is in Canada. Whereas baseball, the coaches just were doing things so it was fun for the kids. They were out there because they wanted to play, not because they were trying to move up to the next level and make their high school team and then make a university team and then get into the minor leagues. There's no sense of that. It's playing for fun. And then the adults who play all over, especially the ones who pick up the game, when they're 20 or 25 or 30, they're playing it because they like it. And it's a challenge to learn these new skills and have something different to think about. But yeah, they do it because they love it, not because of any gain after.
Gosh, yeah, we could talk about this forever. Perfect game just ruined baseball, I think. And now everyone's doing their velo programs, and there's just no fun left.
Yeah.
I coach high school ball, and I coach at an international school, so we get kids from around the world. And we get a lot of cricket players who are shockingly good at baseball because of their hand-eye coordination. And there's no sense that they're going to college, and it's so refreshing to see. It's exactly how it's meant to be played, and that's exactly what goes back into the UK. I think that's the purest form of baseball being played right now is over there, and I'm so glad that your book highlights this. It's easy for me to overlook this, and I think we should establish this for anyone listening here. Is there any sort of comparison you have between a sport or an event here as baseball is in the UK?
It's not at all popular. I mean, certainly not as a spectator sport.
No, sir.
As
No.
much as Major League Baseball tries, and the London series is popular, and the leagues all shut down there for the weekend of the series so that people can go in and see it. But it's not. It's a very niche sport. There are people who watch it. A lot of yes, but you probably have noticed this. There are a lot of people who came into playing baseball through watching Major League Baseball late at night on Channel 5, and that was their entry into baseball. They liked watching it and thought, I'd like to play that. But it is incredibly niche. Soccer here, watching it, is far more popular than watching baseball there. Same with playing soccer. I'm not sure what the lacrosse, maybe? I don't know.
I was gonna say like curling in the States or something. Like
Maybe.
it it's almost like a hobby. When I tell people in the States that I played baseball in England, they look at me like it's the craziest thing they've ever heard because they don't think that it's even a thing happening there.
Yes. The reaction you always get is there's baseball there. Whether it's England or Scotland or wherever, it's just that's not a thing, is it? Well, it is, and people are very passionate about it, but it's a small number of people.
So one of the issues here, one of the biggest issues I think for the health of baseball is I've become a big Premier League soccer fan
Mhm.
over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Huge fan.
Yeah,
Because I can watch the games in the morning
Yep.
on the weekends. And like as you mentioned, these games for baseball are coming on late at night. I remember when I was living over there, I'd be able to watch 3, 4, 5 innings maybe. If there's a game I'm really into, I'll try to stay up and watch all of it, but it doesn't lend itself to it. Do you have any feel how the World Baseball Classic did over there? Did that influence or bring any more people into the game?
Don't really think it did. And one of the issues is that British team that made the World Baseball Classic is all passport holders. So in fact, people who are from Britain, from the UK, and play are a bit resentful because there's no path to the national team. And Ireland has gone the opposite way, and I think they have a plan about how this is going to change. I think right now it's something like 75% of the national team have to be native people from Ireland. and 25% are passport holders. And they're trying to raise the number of native born players as a way to sustain the team and give these young people coming up a path to play on the national team. They understand that that means that it's going to be a lot longer before they even can play in the European Championships. But their aim is to sustain the game for longer. I'm not sure what British baseball did in terms of the World Baseball Classic is ultimately going to help them. It got a little bit of press. I think it was a good story over here more than it was there, to be honest.
Interesting.
People in the baseball community understand it and were cheering for it, but I think it was such a small blip outside of the baseball community that I don't think it had the effect that they wanted it to.
It's interesting. And I can speak from my experience. I mean, obviously, I'm American, and I think that on the Kings, most of them were Americans, or Americans who are now residents in the UK, but almost everyone there had played baseball in the States before at some point, or their parents were, which is the other thing. And you do get some, I think increasingly so, you do get younger British players whose parents were American. I mentioned before we started that I play with the Oxford Kings in Italy every year. And when we play in Italy, 100% of the players we play against are Italian. 100%. No foreign passport holders. And I think you see that difference when they're playing in these tournaments, that they do actually have a system in place there. And that makes a massive difference. It really, really does. When you talked earlier about going to these trainings, so even saying training is such a British way. There's a handful of things like that you mentioned in the book too. But that's one of my ones that took me the longest to get used to. Going to physio as well for rehab, we would call it here. Little things like that. When you were at these training sessions, what was the vibe like? Was this just a sense of something to do, or is this a deeper sort of connection they have now with each other in the game?
It depends on the site, but for most of them, it is something to do. It's a way to have fun. I think that's at almost every place. The predominant vibe was that it's fun. And people do it for different reasons. The expats, so many of them, it was, I hadn't played baseball for a long time. I moved over to Edinburgh or Leicester or wherever it was. I picked it back up. It was a way to reconnect with home, or it was a way to get back to something I like, or something like that. And for the people who picked it up as adults, sometimes it was they wanted a challenge. Sometimes it was, I used to play rugby, but my body can't handle this, and this is a way to stay physically fit. For some people, it was the sense of community. That team in Cork, for example, I think they have people from 19 or 20 different countries, and all of them played baseball at home, like Poland and Latin America and the United States, all over the place. But that team has really come together, and they've become this almost family. And they do all kinds of things outside of baseball, but the baseball is what's important. And there and other places, there are people who don't even play the games. They come to training. And that's what they want to do. They want to do the training and see people and go through all of that, but they don't really want to play the games. So it's an interesting mix of the reasons people have for playing. And the way people come together can be really magical. So in Leicester, I end the book with this. There was a young man who was going to school over there from Florida, and a guy who was going to school over there who was from Japan, and a guy who had grown up in Leicester. And they became friends through baseball. And I don't think they would have ever met in any other circumstances, but they were close with each other. And it was really kind of magical to see.
That's very much how I feel about the Kings and the guys that I play with, and even the Italian teams that we play against now. It's this incredible meeting of cultures and people who I never could have imagined growing up outside of Detroit that I would be playing baseball in Italy or the UK or meeting people who
Yeah.
spoke Italian or
Yeah.
or we had a Japanese guy on the team for a long time, fantastic player for the Kings, and they do become family. And
Yeah.
when I see them, it is like this big
Yeah.
reunion. And I think maybe it's because of the nicheness, the smallness of the sport, perhaps, where it feels like it's just us doing it.
And I think too that it sometimes that crosses over to other teams because there are so few people who play. And if you play over a number of years, you get to know the people on the other teams in your
Yeah.
league.
Yeah.
So that it's almost like old home week when they all come together because they all know each other, and it's not the sense of cutthroat competition that you sometimes get in leagues here where you don't talk to the people on the other team. There they do, because they know if we don't have other people to play, this is done. We can't keep going. So there's a real sense of camaraderie. In Baseball Scotland, for example, they play each other, competitive, etc., but they always send this unofficial Team Scotland down to the big tournament in Slough every year, and it's people from all the different teams that spend the weekend together, having fun and competitively trying to represent Scottish baseball. It's really
It's
fun to
great.
see.
Yeah, that's great. You very briefly in the book, you run into the New Forest Thunder Knights, who we have sponsored since their inception. They are an incredible tale of success. Sam Williams is one of our illustrators, and he manages the lower team there. I think they're A now. They split into two teams, and I believe they just got a base. They fundraised for a baseball field, so like
I
they
saw that.
within 3 years or so, they've essentially built an organization end to field. It's incredible. I was really excited to see you ran into them. Do you have any idea why they have been able to have sort of a success while other teams haven't? Is there any idea about like what leads to a successful team over there?
I think every team that's successful has at least a couple people who are completely dedicated to the success of the club and to helping baseball grow in the particular place that it's been planted. The Thunder Knights, to me, are a bit like the team in Cork, which is also a new team, but it's a team that grew out of a past experience that was negative. From what I understand, there's some of that with the Thunder Knights, and I don't. But I think in both those situations, the people involved saw how things had been done previously and didn't want to repeat mistakes. So I think it's a combination of some people. Cork, for example, have 3 or 4 people who are intensely invested in the success of baseball there. It seems to me that that's also happening with the Thunder Knights. And again, I think it's not wanting to succumb to the past mistakes.
I've got one more for you here, and we've kind of danced around this throughout the whole chat here. Is there anything we should learn from UK baseball over here in the States and in Canada?
I think a lot of it is about how do you bring fun back to baseball, because I think a lot of kids stop playing baseball because it stops being fun and it becomes very quickly too serious. When I was a kid, we would, at recess or breaks, we would go play baseball. We'd throw the ball around. We'd play move up. If we didn't have enough for 2 teams, we'd play with as many people as we had. And I think bringing back that sense of fun is what we need. That sports get too serious too quickly here, especially whatever the majority sport is here. So baseball and hockey are the ones in Windsor, for example, that I can think of. But they all get too serious too quickly, and that happens over there with with soccer and in Ireland with hurling. It's just the fun gets leached out when you're so concerned about moving up to the next level instead of thinking about it as a game.
I tell my high school kids, play until it's not fun for you. And you can also find places where it is more fun than others.
Yeah.
And that's also why I play all the time. I'm going back to go play with the Kings because it is still fun for me over there.
I think about Ryan, one of the guys at the Leicester team, who was from Florida, and he played very high level high school baseball and got completely burned out. And he played shortstop in high school, and he didn't play for a few years, and he came to Leicester, and he decided, I'm going to try. I'm going to play. And he was like a little kid. He was having so much fun. They, of course, asked him to pitch. And instead of begrudgingly doing it, he decided, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to learn how to throw multiple kinds of pitches. And he would have these intense conversations with his catcher about how the ball was breaking. And it was great. And he was just having fun. He knew there wasn't a next level to get to, that this was it. And it was just so great to see.
Well, Dale, thank you so much. This has been a great chat. I've enjoyed every minute of this. The book is fantastic. I can't recommend it enough to anyone who's interested in baseball around the world and baseball beyond the major leagues and what is actually happening out there. Because baseball, I think, really is a global game now. I mean, it's not the biggest game in the world in the UK, but it is there. And I think that's an important thing for people to realize. That was Dale Jacobs. His book, Makeshift Fields, Chasing Baseball Around Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales, is out now. We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,